All right, we'll call to order this City Council special meeting agenda for Monday, March 20th, 2023, 4 o'clock p.m. Roll call and certification of quorum. Madam Secretary, I will certify that we have a quorum present, as all members are present with the exception of member Camcar. With that, we'll move to citizens' comments. Do we have any? None, so we'll just move forward to new business. Council input and discussion regarding the capital improvement program. With that, staff, take it away.
Thank you, Mayor, and good afternoon, Council. This is the CIP workshop really to kind of kick off our CIP budgeting process. And so tonight I'm gonna go through a lot of the information on the projects. I get to kind of back the clock up 10 years or so when I was a little bit more involved in projects and pretend like I know lots of details about our projects since Robert's no longer with us. And then Jameson Appel, who's heading up our capital projects group, he's been out on vacation. So you get myself, and then we've got Eric to talk a little bit about the finances as well. So we'll go ahead and get the slideshow going. Who's running that, Eric? So tonight we're gonna break it down into the general fund and then the enterprise fund. We're gonna talk about our ongoing projects, and then our FY24 O&M impacts from those ongoing projects that we're going to be completing this year. And then new projects we have scheduled and planned to kick off in FY24. Those are the projects that will then impact the debt sale of the following year and the debt rate in FY25. As we've talked about several times, the ongoing projects we have going right now are already really kind of locked in and are setting that debt rate for FY24. So we'll show some of that information as well, look at the property tax rate impact, and then do the same thing basically in the enterprise, but then look at the rate model. We haven't updated the rate model as of yet, so it'll say what we've seen in the past. But we can talk about what the big drivers are in that, and then as we get more information and work through the budget process, we'll be able to refine those numbers. And then we've got a couple of CIP, the whole process improvements that we're looking at, and then we've got a quick update on our surface water treatment plant. So with that, we'll get moving.
Real quick, so at the end of the general fund, property tax impact, do we want to stop and do questions break it up that way?
Yes, sir, we'll do that.
Okay.
Yes. All right, so we'll move into the general fund. Ongoing projects, these are our tax-backed general fund projects. And so our projects that are ongoing, drainage projects, we'll break these down by the different categories as well. So ongoing projects this year, we've got in the design phase. You see there several drainage projects that are associated with the GLO funds that we've secured to move those forward. And then in the construction phase, the ones you're familiar with, of course, the Wesley, the Willow Crest subdivision, as well as a generator at the Cowards Creek Detention Station, and then the Hickory Slough Regional Detention Pond, which is a joint project with DD4. So moving into the parks projects, we've got several things in design. We've got the next phase of the Shadow Creek Trail System, which this is the segment that ties our trail system in with the Shadow Creek Ranch Trail System. And then on the east side of town, we've got the Clear Creek Trail that takes the existing trail from about Hughes Road up to the U of H Clear Lake Pearland campus, and then the storage building at Centennial Park. The things that we still have in construction this year are the couple of park equipment recapitalization projects from the 2019 bond program, the irrigation as well as the shade structures, and then the Wood Creek Park Bridge. And then we are continuing our work at the Sportsplex at Shadow Creek Ranch Park, and that includes the conversion of the baseball fields to field turf, so that those can be used for either baseball or softball, and then the adaptive playground, which we'll be having the ribbon cutting for here very soon. Transportation projects ongoing this year. We've got several of those in the design phase. The big ones being Macawa, as well as the Smith Ranch Road extension, those both being about 80% refund are funded through the TIP program with HGAC and TxDOT. One of the ones that'll impact us up here pretty soon is the Clear Creek Bridge replacement that TxDOT's managing, as well as additional intersection improvements in Shadow Creek Ranch that are TERS funded, and a street reconstruction project in Sherwood subdivision. The projects that are in construction phase this year, McCard Road, which we expect mid next month to have everything open. Intersection improvements, Broadway at Dixie Farm Road, our Safe Routes to School project. 2 years worth of traffic signal upgrade program. Those were impacted significantly by equipment orders and being able to get with the supply chain issues, being able to get all the equipment for those two projects. But they're moving forward now. And then the Bailey Road expansion, we've taken bids on that, so it's be moving into construction phase here very shortly. So projects that we've actually completed thus far in FY23, we completed the replacement of the chillers at the Recreation Center, and then of course the Sherry D. Coleman Animal Shelter and Adoption Center was completed in the facilities group. In parks, we completed the Independence Park Drive to the backside of the stage, as well as the Centennial Park restroom renovation. And then on the street side of things, we completed the intersection improvements that included Windward Bay and Broadway, the Pearland Parkway, the additional traffic signal there, as well as the traffic circle modifications, and then the Shadow Creek Ranch sidewalk extension. So the projects that have been completed in 23 that we're going to see those operation and maintenance costs impact our FY24 budget are the ones you see before you. Of course, you know, drainage and park equipment, those are fairly, and sidewalks, fairly small dollars. We start adding to those so that we have funds continuing to grow in those areas for long-term maintenance, with the big impact being McCard Road. So when we add the street lights, the cost of those, as well as landscaping and mowing of the right-of-way for McCard Road, we'll see that's the estimated cost we'll be adding to the FY24 budget for that project. So projects planned to start in the design phase in fiscal year 24. So right now we'll see some of the FY23 bond program projects. We don't have them listed here. These are the ones that are funded and in the CIP. So we don't have anything starting in streets, drainage, and parks. And that's just a reflection of getting to the end of our 2019 bond program and not having the 2023 bond program in there until we go through the process of putting that in front of the voters. So the projects we do have starting are some standby power redundancy at our fire admin as well as City Hall, and then another one of our fiber backbone pieces to continue getting that network to all of our critical infrastructure as well as redundancy for our city network. So then here's the bond projects that'll be in front of the voters next in May that we would schedule to start design either with the remainder of this year or in FY24, and that includes the Hickory Slough Sportsplex Phase 2, as well as in streets we'd start the Hughes Road project, and that's that from Pearland Parkway to the city limits, as well as start the work on the concrete sidewalk and gaps replacement project program. And then over on the drainage side, of course, that's where the bulk of our dollars are for the 2023 bond program. And so these are the 5 drainage projects we've got lined up to start early in that bond program.
Trent, real quick, the slide before it was to start design, but I don't see Hickory Slough Phase 2 detention.
We've got that under design.
Under design, but I know the slide before talked about design, but there was nowhere in there did it. There we go. Okay.
So I may have skipped that. So we got the Phase 2 design there, so that'll roll into construction. Right. I think I mentioned the Hickory Slough Regional, which is the joint project with DD4. But yes, we'll start that detention pond design this year, or it's ongoing this year. So yes, that'll allow us to roll into the Sportsplex, the doubling of the number of fields there. So I'm going to hand it over to Eric at this point to walk through the finance side of the presentation for the general fund.
All right. So on the general fund side, the taxpayer-backed debt, this is what we're looking at for the FY23 debt sale. You can see the different types of debt we're looking to issue. You have your 2007 GOs, 2019 GOs, COs, and TERS reimbursable debt. This next column is what council approved via the intent to reimburse back in September, October timeframe, and then we have since revised estimates downward on what we're going to be selling. You can see the differences by issuance type over here on the right. COs had the largest reduction of about 15.7 million. And then when you add all those up, the total tax-backed debt issuance has gone from what we estimated at 52 million down to 28.5 million. That's and those numbers have already been factored into the tax projections you've seen at previous meetings when we've discussed property taxes. That's already built in as part of some of the way we've been lowering the property tax impact for residents next year. So this is already baked into those property tax calculations. A quick update on the debt service forecast. The current tax rate projections do include the reminder of a few different things: the TERS debt defeasance, the refunding opportunity, the updated FY23 debt issuance, which I just showed you on the previous slide, and then the FY23 bond package. Under these new scenarios, the next year's debt service rate will be about 4.25 cents lower than the analysis presented on January 9th. So you saw these numbers last time, and the maximum debt service rate was 3 cents lower than what we presented on, and that's what we presented on January 9th. These two columns on the right, you might be asking, why are there two columns with $181 million? I apologize, I should have labeled these better. This was the $181 million, if passed, without these options implemented up here in the first bullet point. The second column includes these options that we listed up here and is much more realistic of where the tax rate will need to be at to sustain debt. Of course, all of this is based on actual growth and change in values, so these are still round numbers at this time. Reminder on how CIP funding works. It's a little different than anything else we do budget-wise here. So the current debt obligation already exists, right? Just like when you take out a mortgage, you're going to be paying that over 30 or 40 years. And then when we plan the FY24 CIP, which is what we're talking about today, that debt won't be sold till next spring, which means the debt payments for it don't begin until FY25. So I tell you all this to try and drive home the point that any changes we make to the FY24 CIP won't affect the tax rate until FY25. So there's always a year lag because of when we sell debt, it takes some time to sell it, and then it takes time for the debt payments to start being made. And with that, we're gonna turn, actually now's a good time to pause before we go over the enterprise fund projects.
Sure, so now we can kind of pause and have any discussion about any of the projects coming up or any other, projects. This is an early look, and when we complete the enterprise piece, we've got some recommendations on the CIP process, and one of those is in the past, we've done a lot of the work, say December through this time frame, maybe in the May time frame, and with the getting the CIP in front of P&Z in the June time frame, and then in front of council in the June time frame. And what that does, as you saw with our debt sale, where we are projecting $52 million, and we're really doing the $29 million. What one of the things we're going to talk about is proposing to start to move some of that work back in the year, so that we're actually we'll adopt the CIP potentially when we adopt the operating budget. And what that allows us to do is kind of look at the numbers later in time. So that we're tighter on what we think we'll be able to get done in the next fiscal year when we do our intent to reimburse. And then we're also going to look at potentially, getting away from that or doing a debt sale at a different time during the year, which may be have a longer runway to it, but looking to make some changes as well when we do that, so that we get some of those numbers tighter when we do the intent between that and what we actually sell in debt. So with that, I'll turn it over to the council and for any questions.
Yeah, so I'll just open it up to council for any, we're only talking about the first part of this that we've gone through, the tax-backed part of our CIP. So if anybody has any questions or comments.
Sit here reading some of this stuff over here. I don't know if we have gone back to the state, not even for state funding support, on state projects or not. But the state now is, they're putting out stuff in these magazines about, where they're at 188 billion over in revenue. Either get it back to taxpayers or let us send more money out to the counties and the cities on doing that. And I don't know if we, have made any inroads talking to them and seeing, but I mean, they're publishing it now and they're printing. They got more money. $188 billion. That's a pretty good chunk of change for the state of Texas. And I would certainly, I come off in May, but I would certainly look at the standpoint anything that has a possibility of state funding as a project or participation in state funding. I'd have that list and I'd go back to Austin. I mean, that's a lot of money sitting up there. That's general revenue money. That comes from people all over the state of Texas, Todd.
Well, I can tell you, our state representative has asked for a list, and we have been working through our CIP on what we can get into to his office, certainly being on appropriations. The 188 billion that you speak of is not just the budget, but it's also the overage. So that included in that is the regular budget. I think they're going to end up with some 40 or 40 plus billion in surplus. And yeah, so we've been talking with his office. I know Trent and the rest of the capital improvements area have been talking about what projects we could maybe potentially get up to there and get funded. It's like anything else, though. A lot of our projects are, mega millions, not like $1 million or $750. Like the park that we got done was a $750,000 line item. But I know we've got some stuff that we are sending up to them for potential consideration, just like anybody else. We'll try as well. The rest of it, all the funding for roads and all of that still goes through. We're in a call for projects right now through the Transportation Policy Council at HGAC. So that call is still there, and we've got a laundry list of projects in that call as well. But I'll let Trent further expound on that.
Sure. Thank you, Mayor. I've had several conversations with Representative Thompson's office on some particular funding. It's not in the general fund. It would be over on the enterprise fund. And so they have all of that information. And so we'll continue to provide them the information they need to pursue that. And then, as the mayor said, there is a call for projects out with HGAC right now. We've got all of our roadway priorities submitted in the initial phase of that, and it's kind of going through the next phase of that, and then they'll start scoring those projects over the next several months to see where we stand in the funding list.
Any other questions, comments? Mr. Camcar?
Thank you, Mayor. I just had a couple of questions coming off some slides. I guess I'll go numerically. And first of all, thank you to the staff. I know it's 4 o'clock and it's quitting time. This is getting close to that, so thank you guys for making the time today. Can we go to slide number 9? So the item, I guess here, the McCard Road item, the second white shaded item, TR1405, does that assume bond passage? Is that the same project I'm thinking? Because that's the one on the bond.
That's the project that's about to be completed
So
next month. So that's why the cost of the O&M is in the FY24 budget.
Okay, so those are separate. Okay.
And this is just getting started time on Mondays for us.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Well, I see Lawrence here, and I was like, we got different people here. So there you go. What was my next one? Item on page 12. I understood intent to reimburse estimate as of today, and then the difference, especially on some of the older packages, the 07 and 9. Can we talk about the composition that is in item or the amount of 15.7 million? If I'm understanding, that's items pushing into the future that we are deferring. Am I getting that correct?
So I wouldn't necessarily to say that we're deferring any of the projects. Where some of the if the project hasn't moved along at the expected, pace we planned for a year ago when we were doing this budgeting at that time, then we've been able, if a project had some sort of environmental clearance that didn't come in on time, or we didn't complete all the land acquisition on time, then we haven't moved that project to the next phase. So we don't need that next tranche of dollars in this fiscal year. So we are able to push that to selling that debt the following year. So we're not selling more than we need for the project this year. So when we're budgeting, the earlier in the year we budget, we've just got projections and schedules, and we're always assuming that each individual project, if it moves along at the pace it's planned for, we'll need those dollars, and when it doesn't, we just push off the sale of those dollars.
Can I have as a tracking item, the composition of the 15.7 of those projects that
Sure.
qualify under the criteria you've laid out?
Sure. So when we bring back the actual debt sale, I believe in next month or May, when we bring that back, we'll have the details that backs up this information.
We can put it in a Thursday memo, just something.
Yeah, it's forthcoming.
Got it.
Yes.
And let me ask a question. We've already programmed the budget on O&M and debt. Like you said, it's earlier on in the budget cycle, so you have to at least have a box. What happens from a budgetary point of view? Because the rate is set, the amount is there, the levy has been made. But what happens with this, I'm going to say 15.7 million of space? What happens from a practical matter?
So this will impact the 24 debt service rate. So if we can we go to the debt service rate, or the sheet with all the, yeah. So the first bullet point here, this is what we talked about at the last budget update meeting. So this rate projection includes the TERS debt defeasance, the refunding opportunity will be on its second reading next Monday, and then it includes the updated FY23 debt issuance. So that FY23 debt issuance, that update is less than 15 million. So when we talked about those three different pieces impacting the debt rate at the last meeting, that updated debt issuance it's the one that's dropping the debt service tax rate by a penny in FY24. Remember, we had 4.25 that's dropping. 3 of it was from the TERS debt defeasance changes. A quarter of a penny was from the refunding opportunity, and the other penny was from the updated FY23 debt issuance. So when we issue that debt in May, that impacts next year's debt rate.
And then I appreciate you guys being on the slide. That was my last one. So we're only on we're not on water and sewer. We're just on debt and O&M. The rate that we're at right now is what, Eric, 60 some odd cents?
We're on
Total, 62.3.
62.3. And then let's assume our bonds pass in May and that package moves. This assumes that we're going to be, I don't have my calculator with me. Where are we going to be at, assuming?
So the first line there is FY23, so that's the current debt service rate of 0.3388. And the right-hand column is what we're assuming now with all the changes we made. So in FY24, we're looking at 0.3425.
And what do? We add the O&M on top of that?
Well, the O&M goes into the other half of our tax rate. That's the O&M rate.
So what would that combine them? I'm just trying to get a global, what are we looking at, assuming we keep our CIP?
Do you remember what it was from our update last meeting?
I don't.
It was,
I'll see if I can pull it up and get back to you while we're in this meeting. We had the number from the last time we talked about the rate hasn't changed.
I just want to be able to put that out there. So if we can have that, we can keep moving, but before.
Sure. So, in the last update, we had 3 different growth scenarios, I think 5, 7, and 10%. So that O&M side is going to be very dependent upon how much we grow. And we don't have that information at this point. So it's assumptions.
Well, then we can do the lowest one just for the sake of pragmatism and conservatism. And I'm happy to do that. I just would like to be able to say, we talked about it on what is today, 3/20, and here's what we thought, assuming we keep the CIP in its current place.
And so we do have our monthly budget update item on next Monday night's agenda, so we can, reiterate and look at those numbers again there as well.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Mr. Koza?
Yes, Trent, on slide number 4, where it's got the Hickory Slough, I think the mayor kind of hit on this. Are there some things already being done out there that are separate from the parks package, where the sports complex and that type of stuff? What are the different parts that are under construction and design phase, that type of stuff?
So the piece on the left side that's on the design phase, that's actually the expansion of the detention pond at the sportsplex. So that's, if you're looking at it from the road, it's the left half. We'll dig that part of the pond out, and then we've got the completion of the park piece of it in the bond package that's on the May election. The piece here that's shown under construction phase, the Hickory Slough Regional Detention Pond, that's actually a different site. That's the site next to McCard Road that we acquired a piece of property to provide detention space for the McCard Road extension project. And we went into a partnership with DD4 to utilize the rest of that property for a regional detention pond. And so DD4 is actually digging that pond out as we speak. And we're a partner in that with them.
And Trent, correct me if I'm wrong, but on the design phase, on this left side of this, the Hickory Slough Detention Pond Phase 2, that was a 2019.
Yes, sir. That was a 2019 bond project.
Okay, that's what I was just trying to decipher what
Yeah.
was.
So in 2019 bond program to do the pond,
Right.
this year bond program to do soccer
Digging it
fields in the pond
Right.
once it's constructed.
Right. Okay, that's what I was just trying to figure out where it all shook out. And then I've been hit up with a lot of questions on McCard. I know we're kind of working on the lights. What kind of time frame do we have in regards to having that wrapped up?
To having McCard open,
Yes, sir.
I think the last update I had was about April 15th.
Notice
Unless
you didn't say
anyone
what year.
shakes their head at me and says, no way. I'm sticking with April 15th. I do know we've gotten power to some of the signals, and the rest of them were lined out, and it's getting very close.
Okay, so that's the only thing that's hanging it up is the lights. And
I think there's maybe a couple other minor items, but
Centerpoint,
they're all being
their,
worked.
their electrical issues worked out, power.
I believe we did. At least I know we did on some of them, and they were working through the other ones. But we did have the main folks we needed to be talking to on top of it.
Any other questions, comments? Oh, Mr. Camcar, follow up?
I'm sorry, I apologize. The assumptions for the debt build out on this, is that assuming the 23 to 27 CIP that's posted currently? Have there been any material updates? I'm pulling that off, but I know we don't have, it's like 200 pages.
We're in the process of doing those updates right now. So the debt that you're seeing here is based off the 23 through 27 CIP as written, with the exception of the slowdown in FY23. We're not selling as much debt as we thought we were going to sell between here. So that's one difference between them.
Right.
And then right now we're in the process of working with finance and EPW together to figure out, okay, what's it going to look like in FY25, 26, 27, 28.
The other big difference is that does include the $181 million 23 bond package.
Got it. And it's really nicely done on the website. If you go Google it, it comes up really cleanly. So good job to the team. One more item before I forget. FA 2502, which is the range and the drive course. I know that we were working really hard to get this into what was going to May, but I think we were having some
Sure. So
geotech kind of things.
Sure. So that's the PD's firing range, as well as a driving track to go with our police academy. And so we're wrapping up on that preliminary engineering report. And so we've got the costs there. There are some, things with that site that we knew were there that are driving some of the cost. So our next step is we're going to take that and see if there's potentially alternative locations that, the cost of that alternative location versus the additional construction costs for the site we have maybe offset each other. So we're going to look at some different things there, working with Chief Spires and his team to see, if there are other alternatives that make more sense. And then I think we'll bring that back to the council to walk through the project and a recommendation on that, so that we can, plug that back into the CIP and decide when and how to fund that, because we still need a funding source on that project.
It's been a passion item. I think the chief is working really hard to get us that academy. I don't know if you saw the newspaper. I get the newspaper still. And Pearland PD made 1A above the fold for being the first group in the country, not the state or the region, in the country, to have that drone designation. So kudos to the team. I think the police are growing one of the best outfits in the country, and I really think that that's going to be part of it. I am loath to use COs, and I think everybody knows that, but I think this would be one of those cases where we want to advance that, and I would be very open to hearing that conversation. So it's still on my radar, and I just want to bring it up. Sorry. Thank you.
Questions, comments? Woody?
I can't let that go by. Going through, and the state's mighty proud right now of the $188 billion surplus. They got 26.3% amount of more revenue in here than they had. And this is general fund revenue. This comes from the taxpayers. It's not another dedicated type fund off of it, but it's coming from the taxpayers. Those dollars on a revenue system like that, general revenue, can be used for anything besides, the other side of the legislature for the water and sewer and things of that nature. Can't be done. I can't see it right here. It says here that Texas is projected to have $188 billion additional revenue and surplus. I mean, the additional revenue and surplus, that's taxpayer revenue we're paying in for that. Mayor, I don't know. I'm not going to be sitting up here, so, but I'll probably be more vocal when I'm not. But anyway, I think, that before we spend any other outside money on this, that we do go and get that satisfied that we're not going to get any more, money for this. And I know that you and I have been down this road before. And and even if it was a possibility of coming in, I mean, any of the bridges, if they're off-system bridges, they fall upon another deal with the state that can be funded at that point in time without using any of our taxpayers' money on the city side on there. So I'm just saying that you've been around this a good while too now, Trent. But I'm just saying, before I would think about selling any more debt, I would make sure that, that we are at that point with the state and take a look at the funds that we're going to be using. And most of them, we can do on general revenue fund. But I just make sure, because eventually, this would be an increase to the residents here. And we, especially before we sell any debt on there. So I'm just saying that we need to, the state is coming out now, and I mean, they're very proud of that they're bringing in $188 billion more revenue. And, the big problem is, taxation is not the problem, but rather what you do with the money, that's a problem. I mean, if you're bringing in revenue on taxation that you don't know what you're spending it on, I mean, that, and I'm not saying we're doing that here, but if there's an opportunity to get that money and not go into the local taxpayers' pockets to get it to do it, I think, we ought to resolve all of that at some point. I know that you and I have done this before,
Like I said, those requests are being made.
Okay.
They're already in process and already being made. And just like anybody else in the state's making those requests too. So hopefully we've got the right guy in Austin. I think we do.
Getting first in line.
Hopefully we can be successful in some of those. So, and whether it's on the property tax back or the enterprise side, one side or the other, it comes out of our residents' pockets.
Yeah.
It's either going to come out of their tax pocket or it's going to come out of their water and sewer pocket. Either way, it's going to come out of their pocket. And so
Yeah.
our hope is to have an impact in one or more of those pockets.
Yeah, I'd rather see it come out of the water and sewer type fund and just hit one side of it and get the other.
Well, the good news on that side and on that side of the ledger for us, same thing with the state. One of their primary concerns and primary priorities for the legislative session is to address wastewater infrastructure. They know across the state water is needed. They also know there's aging infrastructure in certain areas of the state, and the whole state is growing. So, the hint that we were thrown was there's a lot of activity in water and wastewater at the Capitol. So that's one of the reasons why our request is going up for water and wastewater, is because that's their priority, that's their focus. And if we can get some dollars in our water and wastewater system, and quite honestly, we know if we're granted something, we know through the last iteration with the park, it's not like the next day they write a check. So it takes a little bit of time for that to process. And so as we move forward with Berry Rose and decommissioning of a sewer plant, the timing of getting those dollars in would work well with what we're doing there. Plus, on our water and wastewater side, the enterprise side, the Texas Water Development Board has been a very good partner in the revolving loans with them. So that side of our ledger, the state knows very, very well, because we deal with them on the Texas Water Development Board. So we're hopeful. We probably ought to have conversations as to how much we've requested. It's a big number, but at the same time, it would have an impact on rates, in a positive. So that's one of the reasons why, because that's where one of our big pressures is on the rate side of things. And so if we can have a positive impact there, we feel like everybody wins, including businesses. And like I said, whether you're paying it out of your property taxes or you're paying it out of your water and sewer fund, it's still coming out of the same residence.
Matter of fact, since you said that where we at on the water for the Southeast plant in Houston, we bought into that plant over there, and I don't know if we've been, what's the rate going up? We put in $40 million into that plant and buying water out of Houston, but we were actually going to take and less water coming out on the west side of Pearland. It's supposed to be a reduction there, and take more out of the Southeast plant in Houston because of the lower cost.
That'd be a great question to answer that. Not sure.
Sure. So we do take the water out of the Southeast plant. We've got 10 million gallons a day out of that plant, and then on the west side, the take point from Houston at the FM 521, that is a more expensive amount. We have a take or pay out there that we limit it to that take or pay during most months, because if we take more, the cost goes up per 1,000 gallons. But in the summer months, we still need that until we get the surface water plant online. Once we have the surface water plant online, we're going to look to modify that agreement, either to reduce the take or pay, or maybe even potentially take that to where it's an emergency connection, so that we've reduced that cost of water coming into our system significantly.
Seemed like we could reduce the stuff on the other side there, not the Southeast plant.
Yes, sir.
Because that's pretty well locked in, bought into it. That's good.
Anybody else? All right. Next phase of the.
All right. With that, we'll jump into the enterprise fund projects. And so we've got lots of ongoing wastewater projects, several in the design phase. Of course, you're very familiar with the Berry Rose and the Longwood project. And then we've got a series of lift station rehabilitation projects that are going on, as well as multiple I&I sanitary sewer rehab projects many of those necessary to be a prelude to the Berry Rose project, so we can get those wet weather flows significantly reduced, thereby making the plant that we have to build for Berry Rose a smaller plant, saving significant dollars there. And then on the construction phase, of course, we've got the JHEC plant that's ongoing. We're rapidly approaching where we're putting the first new pieces of that plant online, probably in the May timeframe, and that'll really help us with our treatment process out there. And then we've got the Bailey sewer line, veterans to the Bailey water plant, and then the Willowcrest subdivision sanitary sewer, and of course our SCADA project. SCADA, we've completed all the water plants, so those are all online, up and running with the SCADA system. And then we've completed upgrading at the Reflection Bay wastewater plant. And of course, the JHEC and the Berry Rose project will get all their SCADA upgrades with the expansion projects. And then you've approved several of the lift stations to be upgraded to the current state SCADA. So that project's going well and on schedule. And we'll see that conclude with the lift stations this year. Next slide. So ongoing water projects, you know, a lot of these center around either transite water line replacement or our water well and water plant rehabilitation projects, where we're going in and we're updating the internal piping to the water plants. We're updating the coatings on the interior and exterior of our ground storage tanks, as well as our elevated storage tanks. And then replacing generators at a couple of plants where the generator has failed and needs to be replaced, as well as early work on the FM 518 utility relocations in preparation for the widening of 518 between 288 and Cullen Boulevard. On the construction phases, of course, we've got our surface water plant that'll be completed later this year, the water meter change out, the Bailey water plant improvements that's ongoing, so we can put both the Bailey and the Magnolia wells back online, and then the Green Tea repump abandonment project. So then we've got completed projects in 23. We completed both the Liberty and the McLean elevated and ground storage tank rehabilitation projects. Westwood Village Water Quality Program, Water Production Facilities Rehab, as well as SCADA on the water side, as we mentioned. And then the last two on there are the projects with the development agreement with Massey Oaks, where they built the infrastructure and we paid for some of the oversizing costs to get that infrastructure down to them. And then on the wastewater side, we've had a couple of lift station rehabilitation projects completed. So O&M costs associated with the projects we'll complete this year. So these are the O&M dollars that'll hit the FY24 operational budgets associated with these projects. Of course, the big one here is the surface water plant. What that is, that increase is a full year of staffing, because we staged bringing on our staffing this year as we're ramping up the plant. And then additional full year cost for chemicals and market adjustments for what we're seeing on chemicals right now. And then the other large one here is when we complete the Bailey water plant improvements. We'll have an increased electrical filtration system operation and maintenance, as well as a lift station associated with that operation and maintenance. So capital projects that'll start design in FY24. On the water side, we've got West Oaks Village water quality project. So this continues our water quality projects where we see those issues within the system. And then the Magnolia water production facility rehab and the Cullen ground storage tank rehabilitation. So this again is doing those projects to keep all of our existing infrastructure renewed and rehabilitated and operational for the foreseeable future. On the wastewater side, we've got Berry Rose gravity sewer. So this is one of the main gravity sewer lines going along Berry Rose that leads to the plant. That's got some operational issues that have to be addressed associated with the plant. And then sanitary sewer rehab projects, so continuing the I&I projects, as well as a Cullen gravity trunk sewer, and then regional lift station rehabilitation. So going back to when we did our wastewater master plan, that identified, it evaluated all of our lift stations and then identified the priority lift stations to be rehabbed. And so this is continuing working on those rehabilitations so that we can get in a regular cycle for getting all of our lift stations rehabbed as well. Next slide, please. So I'll hand it over to Eric to complete the rest of the enterprise fund.
Sure. So one of the changes we made last year in the financial policies was to move to issuing COs for water and sewer projects. We did that for two primary reasons. The first being the interest rate's a little bit cheaper on COs. It's a small amount, but it is a little bit cheaper. The second was that water and sewer revenue bonds require us to take a portion of what was sold, and we have to put, I think it was like 10% aside. It changes a little bit each year, but essentially that locks money up that we can't use for operations or we can't use for, to have more runway on rates and slow down rate increases. So we discussed it a lot last year around water and sewer COs and the advantages and disadvantages of each type of debt. So this year, we were initially planning on selling $63.9 million. We're still in the process of revising this number. We're sitting down and estimating projects daily with EPW staff. But right now, we're looking at about $59.7 million. That's a $4 million difference. And again, this number will fluctuate a little bit as we keep working on it. We do have a rate preview today. This rate preview hasn't changed since October 1st. Because the debt sale is still substantially the same amount as what was presented in the adopted budget for FY23, the rate preview hasn't really changed. So once the CIP sale is finalized, we can begin to update the rate model for this year and get a closer view of what rates will be next year. The final water and sewer rates for FY24 depend on the ending audited fund balance for FY22, which will give us our true starting fund balance for FY23, which matriculates into FY24. And just a reminder to everyone, the enterprise fund is not property tax supported. We've been having a lot of discussions about property taxes. Those discussions do not impact the water and sewer rates at all. Looking at the history of rate increases in Pearland, it's really reflective of sort of these intense periods of capital investment that the city has gone through. If you sit down with the interim city manager, he can list off, okay, during this phase, it was these projects, and during this phase, it was these projects. And right now, we know the projects it is, Berry Rose, JHEC, et cetera. So we expect these rates, we're still in the middle of this sort of rate increase period to pay for these projects. Our utility rates need to be enough to fund our operating cost, to pay for our annual debt service, to meet our bond coverage requirements of 1.15 operating revenues, and to generate enough revenue to meet our fund balance requirements in the enterprise fund. So that's this one down here, these are our policies. Sorry. Our policies, and this up here is something we agree to via bond covenant. This is straight out of the multi-year that's in the budget book. So last year we went with a 13.1% rate increase. This year, I'm still thinking it's going to be around 16%. This will get dialed in further as we go along. And you can see we've tried to balance these throughout the years to meet the needs of the capital program and staffing and other water and sewer operational costs. Wanted to throw up the bond coverage ratio just so we have the formula here. This has primarily been a driver for us over the past few years when it comes to what rates need to be to meet the bond coverage ratio. We're always trying to just do enough to get to 1.15. And you'll see here in a second that this metric is going to fade. And what we'll be talking about with council more this year is fund balance and how we've been leveraging fund balance as much as we can for the past several years, but that's going to become the driving metric going forward. All right, so you don't have to read all of this, I promise. So here's the 13.1% rate increase we did last year. Here's the 16% we think we're going to be looking for in FY24. You can see down here in FY24, because our revenues are going up, the bond coverage ratio goes up to 1.38. That means that's no longer a pressure point for us that's driving rates up. You just have to have it above 1.15. However, what is going to become a driver are fund balances. And here you can see we're looking to end FY24 with about 16% of fund balance left in our operating fund. So the city's large capital projects are what are primarily driving water and sewer rates right now, whether Berry Rose, Longwood, JHEC, or the new water treatment plant. We use debt to finance these projects. It's like a mortgage. You got to pay it back. It's a little more complicated than that when it comes to the payback schedules, of course. It can be different depending on whatever is most advantageous for rates. We refer to the annual debt cost as debt service. And then the model currently has the debt service increasing from $23 million in FY23 to $28 million in FY24. We will be back in about a month or two with the debt sale that will occur. So we haven't sold this debt just yet. The city has used fund balance historically to cushion rate increases. The model shows that we're going to be taking this down to about the level of requirement that we have in the enterprise operating fund, which is 15%. And as I said earlier, the 1.15x bond coverage ratio isn't really going to be the driver this year. It's going to be your fund balances. Same thing on the taxpayer side is true here. Any changes we make to the FY24 CIP won't affect rates till FY25 for the same exact reasons. It takes a year before you start making payments on the debt. Note on the Berry Rose debt sale process. So Berry Rose will have an early works package this summer and a GMP 12 to 18 months from now. And while the full amount of spending authorization is required to begin this project and to begin signing contracts, the full cost of the project will actually be paid for over multiple years from FY24 through FY27. So the debt sale for this project, we're not going to sell all the debt all at once because that would cause issues with that 1.15 ratio and push up rates faster than we need to push them up. So by spreading the debt sale for this project out over multiple years in the enterprise fund, it's going to help us have a more gradual rate increase. So when you see that project come forward in the CIP, it might look like the council is going to be asked to authorize up to X dollars, but we're not going to be spending that all at once. It's a one-time authorization so we can get the contracts going. We've also been working on some CIP improvement processes to the CIP in general.
Eric, let's pause here and we can talk about the enterprise fund and we'll come back with those process
Absolutely.
improvements. So Mayor, we'll hand it back to you and the council for any questions on the enterprise fund.
Well, you want to ask that question? Because it's a good question since it's over the enterprise. Talking about GMP, guaranteed maximum price, when it happens or how does that come about?
Yeah, my question was, are those, I guess I've kind of always been under the impression that they were at more constrained timeframes, but if we're doing this debt sale over multiple years, I'm just kind of trying to get my head wrapped around that.
So is the question, when do we
think-
lock the amount of the contract in versus the selling of the debt?
Kind of, yeah.
Okay. So we're working on the design now, and within about, I think the plan was somewhere early before the design's completed, we'll know what the large bulk of our equipment will need to be for the plant. So we'll do an early works package. It's ordering a lot of that equipment, probably starting maybe some of the plant site work. And so that, like we did with the surface water plant, we did a couple of early works packages there. So we'll lock those dollars in. And then as they complete the design work, the CMAR will then bid out the balance of the work. And when they bid the balance of the work out, that's when we lock in our guaranteed maximum price under the CMAR contract. So we're looking at that being probably out closer to the 18 months. Early works packages later this year, and there could potentially be other early works packages. But once we lock that in, that is what we will pay for that project. So then what this is basically saying is that, if the project's estimated at $240 or $220 million, that we're not selling that much debt the day or the year that we lock in the guaranteed maximum price. We'll sell a portion of that, we'll cash flow it basically. We'll sell that a portion of the debt we need for that year, that particular year. And since it'll be about a 3+ year construction process, then we'll sell some more the following year and some more the following year. So I think we've got the debt sales spread out through FY27 so that those things impact the rate model later in time, have we don't impact it all up front because we don't need it all up front.
Okay, so I guess what I was thinking, and I appreciate that answer, that gives me clarity, was I've always kind of seen them as this compressed timeline thing of like, this is it, let's go for it, but I can see how it's not that now. Also, I was a little confused on, I guess, the early works package and the guaranteed maximum price. I was kind of looking at it as a all-inclusive type thing, but I see they're separate now, so that's all. I appreciate that.
Because I think we will know at some point that even the early works package, this is work that has to be done, number one, but number two, you know, the like the steel and other equipment and those types of things that we purchased in some of these other plants, sometimes that lead time is 12 months, 18 months, whatever. So we need to get those in and lock in those prices as opposed to waiting down the line. So I think that's part of it. We already know that's going to be in the GMP. And then, like you said, when you actually start bidding that stuff out, then you're locking.
Taking all.
Right. And then the debt package is just like anything else. You're not going to build it overnight. You're not going to bill it overnight, but it's going to take 3 years to build. And so then you're going to be getting monthly invoices or whatever, and you'll be paying those, you know, in a debt sale for this year and another debt sale for the next year and another debt sale for the next year, you know, and rolling in over time. So, and that actually does keep, like to Eric's point, that keeps our rates. I mean, they're all still going to go up. They're all still going to spike, but we wouldn't have as big of a spike if we put all the debt in 1 year. We're phasing it in over time. So, yep. Questions, comments?
And those are, how long are those bonds? 25 years, 20 years?
Oh, that's a good question. What's the length of the bonds typically? Is this all are we still assuming Texas Water Development Board?
On Berry Rose,
Yeah.
it's one of the options we're looking at. We haven't done the state revolving fund for the Berry Rose one because of the delays it has caused us on the surface water as well as the JHEC. But we're looking at another TWDB program called the D Fund, which has fewer restrictions. It's basically the state working with you to borrow at the TWDB's bonding rating as opposed to ours. So it'll help us incrementally on the cost potentially. And it still has a few requirements, but not near what you get with federal dollars. We're looking at that. One of the things that's really hurt us on the other two projects is the American Iron and Steel, because we just couldn't even get quotes on some of that stuff and had to put in substitute products just to move the project forward. And we'll have to come back once we get that stuff and change it back out as a requirement of that. So there is a waiver process we're going through on the other ones. We would look to maybe do that up front on Berry Rose if we go that direction. So that's kind of what we're looking at on Berry Rose if we go with the state funding there. That's the project we've also talked with Ed Thompson's office on about potentially an appropriation as well.
Yeah, it's one of the things we found out is that the CMAR process is very difficult under the Texas Water Development Board funding.
It has been. They have published new guidelines and rules that do accommodate the CMAR process much better. So I think we'll be in better shape moving forward from that standpoint if we go that direction.
Questions, comments? Mr. Koza?
Yeah, Trent, one thing that, I don't know, 5-6 months ago, we were talking about meters, and we had the gentleman in here from Itron said that we should have it wrapped up in December. Do we have any kind of updates on where we're at on our meter project to get forward to get this wrapped up?
Sure. So we had a meeting, I believe it was in January, and it was basically to try to line out, okay, you guys are so far behind. This is it. We need to get a plan and a schedule moving forward that you can meet. And so they've laid that out. They're getting in and going to start putting up the additional, I think it's 11 poles starting the end of this month, which is a little bit behind, but I just talked to their main person over our project last week. And so They're working to, it still fits within their schedule to complete that based on how they built that in. And then we're looking at a couple of other things that'll potentially help us get the project wrapped up sooner than the schedule they gave us in January. But, so what we're doing is, we're holding their feet to the fire for the schedule they gave us in January, or they'll be back in here. And so, that's where we're working with them on. I do want to, make sure everyone's aware that, any of these additional towers or any of the additional things that they're having to provide to finish the project, that is all, those additional costs are all on Itron. We're not paying for any of those additional things. While it's caused a lot of delays in the project, we haven't been out any additional dollars for the project. And so,
Their clock ran out a while back.
Their clock ran out a while back, and so we're looking at, it'll be probably third quarter this year is what they laid out for us to get everything wrapped up. But we'll start seeing big progress here in the next probably 2 months.
We've asked, one of the big issues, we can get the poles, we can do all that, but then it's center point and electricity, and getting it run, getting it fed, and get all that. And so our teams have been meeting with CenterPoint as well, that, when this pole hits, we need CenterPoint there the next day. I mean, we are so far behind on this. We've been asking, get this lined out. So we have a request coming in, and we have CenterPoint, and we can get these things energized, not take, 4 weeks to 2 months to get, stuff done, but get it done in a shorter amount of time.
These poles that we're talking about, are these the ones that look like lights where they've got street lights attached to them?
So I don't know. I don't think any of these have street lights attached to them. They're concrete monopoles. We have them like at all of our lift stations and things like that. So
Okay.
It's like needle. The one you see it just has the needle going up.
Okay, because there's some that have been popped up on Scarsdale that have street lights attached to them within close proximity of a real street light.
Those may be the 5G that either AT&T or Verizon are doing. Is Mr. Hammond here? Can you confirm that they've done some projects out there and that's what that is?
Yes, sir. It's actually a hybrid of both, Mr. Koza. We have a few CGR poles that do have streetlights on them based on our right-of-way ordinance. It requires co-location, but in most cases, to Mr. Epperson's point, a vast majority of those are Verizon Wireless that have deployed their 5G within the right-of-way.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And then the next question I had, as far as our staff that we've hired for the water treatment plant, we on track having them up and going and the requirements they need so that when we do hit June, we're ready to.
So I'll caveat this with I need to get another update on this, but as of a couple of weeks ago, we were doing good with our maintenance crew, our folks that are going to oversee running the plant. We were struggling a little bit with operators. I do know we have some in our new employee experience orientation that is coming up. So we're starting to see some progress there. We've got a backup plan if we don't see that we're able to bring on enough operators by the time we're ready to go. We've got an existing contract where we're contracting out for some wastewater operators, so we would look to expand that contract.
Okay, thank you.
Question on slide 27. It's got all the hard data. The last, I guess, for at least me, the last 2 years has always been discussion around debt coverage ratio. The issue has been debt coverage ratio. What's causing the transition to balance as the mitigating factor?
Sure. So the bond coverage ratio traditionally has been lower because our revenue needed to catch up to make the 1.15 number work. Now that our revenue is high enough, the way the math works is that we're kind of out of that pickle and into the just fund balance being the primarily driver of what rates can be for now.
What is the requirement in our debt or our arrangement that is causing us to have a significant balance over what we have now?
So we've been withdrawing funds from balance to soften rate increases for a few years now, as you can see in this line here, going from 75% to 49 to 34 and we think by the end of FY24, 16%. The policy is 15% of the enterprise operating fund and 25% of, sorry, is that not what you're asking, Councilman?
No, I want to write it down and then ask what would be 15% in this discussion.
We can get back to you. Maybe $500,000.
And 15% of the revenues per year, is that?
No, it's 15. Sorry, this is unreserved working capital. So 15% of total expenditures inclusive of transfers.
Whatever we spend in the year, let's say we spend $100, I need to keep $15
Exactly.
in the bank account just sitting there, and that's not committed to debt service coverage, that's independent.
Yes, this is your rainy day fund in the enterprise system, and this you also have some reserve over in the enterprise debt fund. So there's two enterprise funds: enterprise operating, enterprise debt. Total, we want 25% coverage is the current city policy.
I'm going to use a term of art here. So we're spending a lot of money, and therefore we need to have more expenditure set aside.
Yes, as your expenses go up, so does your reserve requirements.
Just for the public's benefit in mind, because I'm a little slower than most. So we need 15% as our working capital requirement, our cash balance requirement, 15% of the expenditures per year.
Yep, inclusive of transfers.
Okay. And then what is the second item? You said 25%, and I apologize.
25%. So if you wanted to view it as like an enterprise system with both of the funds combined, if you're looking, because you want to include the debt expenditures as well, we want a 25% reserve so that we have enough for literally rainy days, because when it rains more, we bring in less revenue, and we might need to dip into those funds.
Stupid question. So if we spent less money in year two, instead of spending $100, we spend $70, I would reserve less money and therefore maybe not running into this cash pile reservation that I need.
If your expenditures go down, so do your reserve requirements.
Okay, cool. And then second item on this chart, where does personnel, I guess we're rolling that up into what line? I guess that would be operating expenses right above the third bold line right there.
Yeah, it's rolled up into this line here.
We have a rough idea of what our HR expenses. I know we're bringing on a lot of employees. I know some of them are half, some of them are general fund employees, some of them are water sewer employees. Do we have a rough idea of what that headcount is on that number for the budget?
We can certainly get that to you in an email right away. I just don't have it at my fingertips. I know it's in the budget book how many enterprise fund employees we have.
I know this is a very 100,000 square foot look at what is happening there. I will say this for the public's benefit, and I think it's a more robust discussion. I've been a critic on the spending. Some of it is personnel, some of it is we just have to fix things. I understand that. The mayor and I think, had an interesting discussion the other day, and I would at least like to entertain the discussion of where we are on actually what is the personnel as opposed to consultants. It's very, for the folks who are not aware, we don't have as many of these licensed professionals as we would like across the state that operate these facilities. And there are other firms, outside firms, who do have those. I would love to see the city go bid the operations piece on this, on the personnel side. And let's see if we can find cost savings. The reality is the buildings cost what the buildings cost, the pipes cost. But we're coming into a problem where we're spending so much money, now we have to raise rates to accommodate just holding more money. And it's a challenge. And so I'm just talking out loud for the discussion point. We may end up continuing down the course that we're going. I just don't recall us having a very finite discussion out in the public in terms of back and forth on what is the better status. I think we've really tried to hire in-house. That may be the best answer, but I would at least like to have it. And if it is, let's put the capstone on it and say this is the best way to do it. But these are real challenges, and they're hard. And I appreciate the staff working hard on these, but I'd like to have more discourse. We may end up going the way we're going, but I think dialogue is healthy. I'd love to have that.
So I think the last couple of budget cycles, that question's been asked specific to the surface water plant. So, And we provided, a couple of memos and details on the cost of outsourcing versus having that done with employees. And so I believe that's going to be pretty much applicable to the rest of the system and operating the rest of the system. So we can bring that data back forth and
I would love to do that.
and put it out again. And
That's all I'm
we have
asking
that in
for.
front of you.
I'm not asking for more than that. We've got between wastewater and facilities and other things, the surface water plant's very diamond jewel box kind of thing, but these other facilities are a little more, I guess, regular.
Mr. Berry started to ask a question a minute ago.
I just wanted to go back to the formula for the rate calculation, 15%. That's all I wanted.
Hernandez?
Thank you, Mayor. The bond coverage, is that for all types of bonds, or is that just for COs?
So for if it has to do with what type of debt you're selling in the previous year. So if we were to actually sell water sewer bonds, we'd have to hit a 1.4 ratio, which would place more pressure on rates. One of the reasons we switched to COs is it's a 1.15 ratio.
So each product has a different requirement.
Yep.
So we changed that policy a year ago.
Correct.
Roughly. So prior to that, when we sold debt in the enterprise fund, we had to have a 1.4 coverage. And in addition to that, the revenue bonds came with a slightly higher interest rate as well. So we moved to COs for both of those reasons: better interest rates, a lower bond coverage.
Got it. Okay. All right. Appreciate it.
And both of those, of course, impact, help us moderate the rates.
And I will say, as I've had an opportunity since that time to even have conversation when people come up and talk about water and sewer rates and what are we doing to do whatever we can to keep a lid on this. Those are always points that you bring up. That even within this, we've got to have reserves. We've got to have coverage for our debt. People understand that. But even when we say, look, we changed our debt instruments to lower that, which helps us, keep the rates, where we're trying to get to. I just, generally speaking, a lot of people just don't know the work and and everything else that goes into setting rates. Usually, when I talk to people, I go, I know a lot of people just think we throw a dollar on a board and that's the rates for the year. Well, that slide that we've had up, and I tell people, I don't expect people to be able to read this, but know that every single one of these cells has hundreds of cells behind it. And there is a detailed analysis that goes into making this happen. And so when you walk people through this, while they still don't like raising of rates and those types of things, it becomes clearer as to why we're doing what we're doing. And that on top of, you tell them $535 million worth of capital investment in the water and sewer fund or water sewer system, and then they become vividly aware that these rates are going to go up. So it's just that point in time where our growth is caught up, or our water and sewer has to catch up with the growth that we've experienced over some period of time. Even though we've made investments in water and sewer plants, it's just the growth has caught it up to where it's not if we have to do it, we got to do it now.
To that point, I think I appreciate the info on this too, because there is, I think, this growing negative sentiment towards use of COs. I think there's been this discussion that's turned them into this they're not listening to the voters. So this really helps to also have that conversation with people as well.
It is, and it'd be interesting on a Monday night if we did have a light agenda one time to have Roebuck give us a 101 on GO versus COs versus revenue bonds, because I've point blank asked him in the meetings to have the information to talk to people, even some of our folks in Austin, and have asked the question, if we care about the taxpayer, which we all do, which is the best instrument? Fiscally, which is the best instrument? And they don't know the answer.
When I think,
And the answer is CO. CO is actually a better instrument because it's got a little bit lower
yeah.
interest rate and it's got a lower bond coverage rate than a GO. Yeah.
And as Eric pointed out, which was very astute observation, that it's not connected to the property tax. I think everybody does think it's just
Correct.
my property tax rate, but it can actually have these other impacts. So just
Correct.
thinking beyond your property tax remittance, also,
Right.
well, wow, I guess, I can pay a little bit less on water because they're using this instrument. That's all. This is
Yeah.
very powerful
But-
for me, so I appreciate it.
But good stuff, and just to educate us, but also educate, maybe there needs to be a debt instrument 101 even out on our, we could design that to say when people go, what is a GO, what is a CO, what is a revenue bond, how does it work? Having a real good pictorial that you could go through to show how that works. And again, I've often said people that we represent, a lot of people, they just don't know what they don't know. And these get highly technical and we get into the weeds a little bit. And so sometimes when you pull back and you give good information, people come to the same conclusions we do. So it's pretty good. Questions, comments? Enterprise fund? Seeing none, what's next?
All right, so we've also got some CIP improvements that we're thinking about. We've been working with a consultant on looking at our CIP process to see what, overall it's kind of a meta idea, but what can we do to improve the process of how we design the CIP to streamline our operations internally and, reduce repetitive work, ease cumbersome steps, have great public meetings, but not have to bring back things 2 or 3 times to council for approval, those sorts of things. So suggestion number 1 is to look at and explore changing the debt sale to occur in December instead of May. So the advantages of this is that the sale process will begin pretty much immediately after we adopt the budget. So it'll still be fresh in everyone's mind. Okay, we, come October 1st, the new CIP is live, and we're going to go right into, we adopted a CIP for 50 million, we're going to sell 50 million. So it's a much more clear link between the budget and the CIP as far as the public is concerned. And also, it's fresh on everyone's mind. We have just gone through all those budget meetings and everyone remembers it. So this would eliminate the intent to reimburse process. Bond rates in December, some people believe they might be lower. We are exploring that with Roebuck. It has to do with what's available in the market, how many people are selling, what the market looks like. I'm not an expert there, but we'll get Roebuck's opinion on it. The debt service for the next fiscal year would be locked in advance. We'll know what our debt service is going to be dollars-wise earlier than we normally do. And that'll help us, getting that information earlier helps us better manage the property tax rate. Disadvantages, again, we need to explore this further before we truly know if interest rates are lower in December or not. We need to investigate the timing to determine, how would it work if debt sales payments start earlier on? Would they even potentially begin in the same fiscal year as when you sell, and how does that work? So looking at other cities when they sell and how that works for them, making sure it would actually make things easier. And then it would place some pressure on staff to make sure that, when we go to sell, in what we put in the CIP for that first year, we're not going to have the intent to reimburse process anymore. So what we say we're going to sell, that needs to be, that's what we're going to market for. So, we're going to have to really focus in and make sure that those estimates are where we're at normally in, the springtime, right around now when we're going to sale, we're dialing in those estimates much closer. We'll just have to move those processes up. Second idea is to change when the CIP is adopted from July to September, sort of like it used to be. And we would adopt it essentially right along with the budget instead of trying to adopt it earlier, because we moved it up thinking it would make the process easier. Instead, what had happened is instead of giving us 12 months to get the CIP ready, we really only had 9 months a year without any tangible outcomes from it. It didn't necessarily make it a better product, but it did make staff a lot more stressed. And we still ended up discussing it during budget timeframe anyway. Those things just go together like peanut butter and jelly. So we are, the advantages of this is it really gives us an entire fiscal quarter more to work on it and get it prepared and ready to go. It allows the CIP discussions to coincide with the tax rate discussions. Now, granted, Like I said, anytime you're changing something in the CIP, there's that year delay for when it has effects. But I could see it being helpful to have to help council have a more long-term outlook on the city's finances to be able to consider these together. And then this is the time frame. This is actually more of a normal process for when cities adopt their CIP. This is pretty common to adopt it on the same day as you adopt your budget and your fee schedule and your tax ordinance and things like that. Disadvantages, it's yet more information for council and the public to consider during what is already an information flood during budget season, but I know you all are up for it. So those are our improvement ideas.
So if I could just jump in there, that those two suggestions kind of go hand in hand, and one of the reasons that they're appealing is that essentially, when we do the early adoption of the CIP, and then we do the intent to reimburse in October, and then we come back the following May to sell debt, we're almost having to go through and update the budgets to everything in the CIP twice every year. At the time we develop the budget, and then at the time we're getting ready to sell our debt. And that's very, very time consuming on our staff. So, we haven't vetted all the ins and outs of this, but wanted to give you kind of a preview of what we're looking at there that we think would help streamline that overall process and reduce the, kind of amount of things that we have to do twice during the year to manage our CIP. So before we jump into the last segment, any questions or comments on these suggestions?
Barry?
Yeah. Is it just a latency deal, Trent? Because there's so much lag between the time we actually sell the bonds from that point, CIP approval all the way through to.
So the one advantage of doing it the way we do today is, we approve the budget in October, we do the intent to reimburse in October, and we do, we did the $50 million this year, and we expect to, if everything goes right on our projects, we would expect to expend that. Well, everything doesn't go right on every project. And we also have projects that, we bid them and they come in under the estimate we had at the time. We have projects we bid, they might come in over the estimate that we had at the time. And so by, waiting until later in the year, we've bid out or awarded a lot of the contracts by the time we're selling debt. So we can adjust that debt sale more closely to what we're actually going to expend that year. So that's kind of why, one of the reasons we do it the way we do now. But again, to do all that, we're really going back through everything and reconciling the whole budget at that point to sell the debt, as opposed to pushing the budgeting process a little bit later in the year. So that's fresher data when we approve it in October, and then going into the debt sale process right after it, instead of doing the intent to reimburse. And then, what we would see is any projects we haven't bid out at that point, we might see them come in a little bit over, a little bit under. But, those, when we sell that debt, it's typically, especially in GOs, it's flexible enough that, if we've oversold a little bit this year, then that'll reduce what we've got to sell in debt the following year. So I think long term it works itself out. The other piece that we'll have to absorb is because when we do the intent in October and we don't sell debt until May, the first debt payment is not due until the following fiscal year. So we don't impact our tax rate until the following fiscal year. If we accelerate that back to selling debt in December timeframe, then our understanding right now, and then this is things we still have to vet, is that our first debt payment would be that fiscal year. So, we would take that first payment on. Now, again, that's going to impact you once, and then moving forward, it's just the same. So that's why I mentioned earlier that we might have to work our way into this, where we are right now with our tax rate and everything going on the O&M side. I'm not sure we'd want to roll into this year and do that debt sale this December and further impact our overall tax rate by bringing that first debt payment on in 24 that currently wouldn't be planned. So still more to come here, but just some things we're looking at that has some advantages, but we're working through all of the impacts that it may have.
I see the overall issue being the time from the time the project is approved and bid. so to speak, with the contractor, the CMAR, right? They go and bid the project, and then they turn around and by the time we award the project, the pricing has changed.
I mean,
That's what I meant by latency.
Oh, no, I mean, it wouldn't change anything as far as that goes. We would still, you know, when you bid projects and you lock that price into a bid process and then we
Well, maybe not the CMAR,
award
but
it, it wouldn't
the
change.
estimates
So the
we've
estimates,
received.
yeah, what we estimate we're going to sell wouldn't necessarily be as tight as the way we do it now. But again, it over time that works itself out. That may, you sell more one year and you don't spend all that, then you're selling less the next year. Or if you don't sell enough, you might have to, you know, add to a project and to what you sell the following year.
Really quickly, so I just want to make sure I heard the conversation correct. So if we go to back to the old methodology, which would be the new one, I guess, I don't know, you would pass a budget end of September. October, you would sell debt, and then your first debt payment would be prior to the end of that fiscal year, so before the next October.
That's a good summary, I guess.
Okay. And in the current situation, you approve a budget in October, late September, early October, and then you pay, you intend to reimburse in May. And that kicks in. I guess the debt payment is a trailing 6 months or something like that?
Yes, approximately.
Plus or minus, okay. For the benefit, you guys want opinions, I don't have gigantic one way or the other. I mean, work is work, and you're going to have to adjust a knob here or there. When you adjust it, I hate to say it doesn't get easier. But what I would say is we are doing a ton of CIP, and we are doing a ton of budget. The budget is not getting bigger or smaller; it's getting bigger. It's a deluge of information just to get 2 budget books, and then you throw the CIP book, and then you're adjusting the knob there. I'll just say it. I struggle with the budget book, and I think I'm probably more well-read than some, not all, but some, and I struggle. So I'm just giving you honest feedback there. The other thing that I'm very aware of is the 2 principals who really talk in the CIP are the engineer and the city manager, and right now those positions are in flux. And so while I do think this is an interesting idea and it has maybe merit, I'd like to have those permanent folks, if maybe they're the same people, maybe they're different people, be able to opine on that. I would not be comfortable changing that methodology until those leaders present themselves. And I think these are major items. This drives the entire budget process. And I think those people should have the opportunity to opine. So I'm not against looking at this. I'd like to have a pros and cons from a budgeting and timing. I think you guys kind of did that a little bit here. But all of these things do move with regards to when you pay and when you do things. I'd like to have like a timeline more split out. But I do think it wouldn't be prudent to go into this direction until we have more solidified preference from those 2 individuals.
So there's no intent to change when we would sell debt this next year. This is just longer term thinking. What we potentially would need to look at and need to do this year is not adopting the CIP in June, because right now we probably won't have it ready.
Let me ask a follow-up. If you want to adopt the CIP and assume no movement, when do you have to know if we're going to move the CIP or not? Is that August,
I don't think we have to know.
April,
We just do
May?
it. I mean, it's just the time to be able to move forward and put everything together at this point. It'll probably take us past the June, what we've done the last couple of years. We're out of the norm doing it like that. And it, like I said, the biggest reason for looking at these things is trying to streamline and to optimize the limited time we do have to do these things instead of doing some things twice every year.
Agreed. Okay.
So
When was it moved to this system that we currently in?
to the timing from when we adopted the CIP, probably 3-4 years ago, 2 years ago.
So I mean, what we're looking is really it's not far removed from when we used to do it.
And I think looking at that, it was something that was looked at from a standpoint: how do we how do we help separate these a little bit and make it easier? And I think it's unforeseen consequences, caused complications and so we plan to move it back.
Mr. Koza?
The debt cell's a whole nother issue and a whole nother thing. And like I said, I would not recommend moving to that this year. We've already got our challenges for the FY24 budget already. It's a longer term thinking, and we've got to vet through all the pros and cons of that anyway. So we're not recommending that piece of it started this year.
So my comment or question was kind of along the mayor's. I want to know, one, how long ago this was. So if we are at whatever time point, whether it's a year from now, 6 months from now, a year from now, whatever that might be. So being able to switch back to what you're suggesting here would be fairly simple. I'm not saying that it's simple.
So
Able to switch back to what we were doing, we'd be able to do that.
So maybe I want to make sure we're separating the two things. So I think what the mayor was talking about was adopting the CIP budget in June versus adopting the CIP budget in September along with the regular budget.
Right.
So that's been done just the last couple of years, and that's an easy move. The longer term is looking at when we sell our debt, and we've sold our debt like we do now. Pretty much, I think, almost as long as I've been here. I can't recall that we did it differently, even 15 plus years ago. So that's the one that we're looking at to see what the options are there, and of course vetting through all the pros and cons. But it's kind of become, because of the size of our CIP, it's become very cumbersome to do that.
Okay. Yeah, I was talking about the CIP. I understand the debt,
Sure.
depending on where it's at, but I was looking at switching back and forth. It should be fairly.
It's fairly easy. Yes. There's no real implications there.
I'd just say that we're doing these quarterly updates,
Yeah.
and that's kept council and staff kind of familiar with the CIP. So I don't have any heartburn moving it back if it does kind of kick off the budget season. And then, next time Roebuck's here, maybe we can start talking through, does it make sense to change that timing over the next 12 to 24 months?
We've already had him weigh in, and that's some of our hesitation is talking to him. And so we need to talk to him further about all the options. But and thanks for bringing that up. The quarterly CIPs we're doing and having this meeting, this early budget meeting on it. I think we can keep that fairly seamless for council as we work through the budgeting process for the CIP. It's just, the final adoption and the final compiling of all the documents and everything can occur a little bit later in the budget cycle.
Well, and that's, Tony, you brought up a question or comment I was going to make, is having the quarterly CIPs keeps this in front of us. So it's not just a big download on one Saturday where we have to, do the whole thing and then approve it. And even tonight, I noticed in the presentation, it was really, quote, limited to this next year. What are we looking in design? What are we looking at in construction in a very short amount of time? And so as we go through the quarterly CIP, if we make this move, we go through the quarterly CIP, we can be putting in each one of them. This is what we expect to see, in the next budget. Next quarter, this is what we expect to see. Kind of a roll up. When we then get ready to do the budget, it's like, this quarter we told you this and here it is. This quarter we told you this and here it is. And it's all rolled up like what we talked about. That's in a perfect world, and CIP is never perfect. So I know things morph and change due to demands on the street and all those kind of things. But I think it would be fairly simple to move from June to September. It's just, with the rest of budget and everything else, it just adds that. But I think the fact that you guys are looking at how we can streamline and make things a little bit lighter, and I'll say this, a little bit lighter, especially in a finance department, and making this happen, I think is a good move to be looking at. Clearly, we need to vet it and vet the other side of things with the debt sale with Roebuck and the advantages and disadvantages of where we go. So I guess more to come as we get further down the line.
Yes, sir. If we're ready to move on, we'll close things out with a surface water plant update.
All right, Mr. Camcar, here it is.
So
I got my bat.
Next slide.
Bat ready.
So our project budget total is $175.5 million. The current CMAR contract value, same as it has been, 137 and some change. No new money has been added. The remaining owner contingency remains $5.2 million, and the contractor's only remedy is time. So we do have one more, I think, slide. This just is kind of the schedule you've seen previously, but I want to focus on the next one, which is kind of the plant testing schedule and timeline. So, you know, we've started the Loop 4 testing, moving into the Loop 3, which is the membrane system with clean water. Throughout that, we'll be doing operational training and troubleshooting, and then we'll move into the Loop 5 as we get into June. Loop 5 is actually testing the membrane system with raw water. And then near in July timeframe, we'll start sending our water quality samples to TCEQ for testing. And then late summer, we'll start flushing transmission lines, getting prepared to put water into the system. We can go to the next slide. Wanted to remind everybody we do have a plant visit or a tour on March 31st, 9 a.m. So I believe everybody should have that on their calendar, and we hope to see everybody there to take a tour of the plant. And so that gets us just to any questions on surface water plant? Okay. So I think we got one wrap-up slide on things to come budget-wise. But before we jump into this, I'll let Eric wrap that up. I want to thank Amy and her team, Kendra, Rachel, Eric, and all the work they've done to help get us this put together. And then our CIP team with Raj and Jameson, as well as Kayla, and all their project managers. You know, a lot of hard work goes into putting this together. And so we appreciate the council's time, extra meeting, early meeting today to go through this and get your feedback. I would ask, you know, one last thank you, and then one more question for council to make sure we didn't miss anything. So I want to thank Eric Roche. This is going to be his last meeting with us. You know, Eric, you know, he's always done an exceptional job presenting our budgets and going through these presentations with you, and we'll miss that. So we'll get those shoes filled and keep things rolling. But do want to tell him thank you for all you know, his time here and what he's contributed to City of Pearland. So one last question just on the CIP. I wanted to make sure, you know, we didn't cover a lot of new projects in detail, but I think that's largely because we're doing the 2023 bond election here in May. That'll be in front of the voters, $181 million of projects. So just wanted to make sure there weren't any other projects that weren't included or weren't mentioned. And we did talk about the police training field and those sort of things, but just want to make sure we didn't miss anything else. If there's not anything else, we'll move on to the kind of our next steps. You want to cover those?
Sure. So we have an early budget input session coming up. Then we will bringing the debt sale to council, same process you know and love. We will then have a new internal services meeting. This is new for this year, to sort of provide more information, give council more time to ask questions about internal service departments, internal service funds, how they operate. Just because when it gets to budget season, we know the focus is on, you know, the resident-facing departments. So this gives us a pause to think about some of those internal services. Then we will have the first reading of projections and supplemental reviews on June 12th. That is the second amendment to the budget that we'll do this year. On June 26th, we're looking at a special meeting with the CIP update series. And we also expect to have a presentation on the new CIP projects and their costs during that meeting. And then on that same evening, we'll have the second reading of the FY23 projections budget amendment.
That concludes everything for us. So if there's any final questions or comments,
Anybody have any last follow-up questions, comments?
I
Mr.
would
Rosa?
make,
I was just going to say, Eric, thank you for your service and good luck with what you're moving on to.
Thank you.
same here, Eric. I want to appreciate you. A little bit of time I've been on audit committee. You've been a wealth of information. Much appreciate all the hard work. Good luck to you, bud.
Appreciate it.
Josh, Put that on Eric's seat. Thank you.
You can have it back at the end of the week.
Yeah, I just want to echo Eric, same thing publicly. You've done a great job for the citizens here. This is detailed, super detail-oriented work, and it's not easy getting in here and presenting as well. But you've done a great job, yeoman's work, in trying to keep it focused and keep it on the subject. So I wish you well in your future endeavors, and don't hesitate to reach back out and let us know where you're at.
Thank you, Mayor. Appreciate it.
With that, we will move to adjournment at 5:40.
When it comes to business, Pearland is serious. As one of the fastest growing cities in the Houston region, we are pro-business and business.